In this video, I'm going to show you a different way of doing helix trim bands that I've shown in the past. And I'm also going to show you how to do a variation on that technique in order to make tiger stripe trim bands. My previous video was about some rod building bobbin holders. I was actually surprised how many people asked me to start making these to sell, both through YouTube and on Facebook as well. So I have ordered some stainless steel spring wire and some better quality beads. I'll work on the way that I actually make these in order to see if I can get the process down fast enough to where I can sell these for a reasonable price. And I will make some available for sale, and I'll put a video out when that's ready. I'd intended to do this video today as my first video of 2023. I'd been working on my technique in order to make these helix wraps smaller, and that's when I discovered I really needed something like the bobbin holder, and that's why I did that video first. It just makes things a whole lot easier for me. So I've got my trim color loaded up in one of these bobbin holders. And I'm going to go ahead and start a trim band like you'd start any other wrap. And I'm going to put a few turns on it to lock it in place. And then I'm going to trim off my tag end. And at that point, I'm going to bring in my main thread color. When I bring my main color in, I'm going to put it behind the thread coming from the bobbin holder. I'm going to put it underneath it against the blank, and I'm going to put a few wraps around the blank and tape it down to keep it in place. And then I'm going to wrap the trim thread underneath the main color and back around to the front. And this will start the helix pattern. And I found that by wrapping this way and making a few turns, 3 or so turns, will actually lock the main thread color in just fine. It's not going to go anywhere by the time you get finished with the wrap. And by making this little change, it actually made the whole process easier to compact into a smaller space. I've been able to make the helix trim bands around 3 millimeters long, which isn't much. That's about what you want. It's somewhere around 1/10 of an inch. That's about how much you want in front of a guide before you get to your guide. So by wrapping the main color into the trim color and making a few turns on it, it locks it down just as it would if you were laying the main color over the top of itself. It is going over itself, but the trim color is mixed in with it. And by making that little bit of a technique change, I was able to really get these shrunk down to where they make a nice wrap that's small enough for most people who are building rods. Try to keep that trim as small as possible in the front just to cut down on weight and excess epoxy. And I think you can see why the bobbin holder is so handy to have with your trim colors when you're doing rod building. These are a lot smaller than a fly tying bobbin holder, so they don't get in your way as much. They don't take up as much space. They're not as heavy. They don't put the same kind of tension on the thread as you can get on a fly tying bobbin holder, but that's not really what I'm looking for here. I can control the tension with my fingers perfectly fine. In fact, I normally do that with long pieces of thread. It's cumbersome, they get in the way, but with these bobbin holders it really keeps them out of the way. So on the technique here, what I'm doing is basically I'm putting a wrap around the thread, turning the rod, and pulling just a little bit on the trim color to move the trim color up or down to line up with the previous row, but offset from the position that it had previously, to where it's kind of bringing it down into a spiral. And it takes a little bit to figure out how much tension to put on or take off in order to get things to line up right. But it's pretty easy, really. I think most people who've tried it have had reasonable amount of success straight away with it. It's not that complicated. Now we've got several turns over the top of our tag end for our main thread color. It's really not any different than taping down your main color to start with and then wrapping over the top of itself. The main color is wrapped over the top of itself with the trim color mixed in. We can go ahead and trim that main color tag end off now that we've got enough turns on it. If I were finishing this helix wrap off, that would be about it. I'm going to show you how I do that, and then I'm going to back it up and show you the tiger stripe wrap. I'm just going to wrap the trim color around the blank a few times to get it out of the way. I'm going to move it down the rod and put a few turns on it. That will get the trim color out of the way, and then we can come with our main thread color and just start wrapping over the top of that what will now be the tag end of the trim color that will get trimmed off. I'll show you my pinky nail and my thumbnail beside this trim wrap just to show you how small they are. You can make these really tiny doing them this way, and they go by pretty quick actually. Me doing this video and you doing it in person, once you got a little practice on it, it's two different things. I'm trying to go slow and I have a camera in front of me also. It's a little tricky to wrap that way. Doing one this length doesn't take much time at all once you get the hang of it. I'm going to back this up now so I can show you how to do the tiger stripe wrap. If you're finishing this off, you just continue on with your main thread color over your tag end of your trim color. Trim that tag off and carry on up your guide as you normally would. I want to put a few additional turns of my trim color on this, just carrying on the initial pattern for a little further, because the tiger stripe pattern looks better to me if it's got a few more turns on it. When I reach the point where I want to stop and start the tiger stripes going the opposite direction, I'm just going to put a full single turn of the main thread color, the black in this case, all the way around the blank, before I start wrapping the opposite direction. Before I was going under the main color with the trim color. Now I'm going to go over the top of the main color with the trim color, and that will turn my stripes in the opposite direction. And I will just kind of make them try to come into sort of a V shape where they meet there in the center, and continue that pattern wrapping the opposite direction. Don't forget, you'll have to vary your tension on your trim color just the same as you were before. But also keep in mind, when you're putting these turns over the top of the main color, you're going to want to be pulling the thread away from the previous row of thread that's gone on the blank. So you'll need to be mindful of that, and you'll probably have to pack in a little more often when you're turning your thread in this direction than you did before with your packing tool. You might put down 2 or 3 wraps and then come back and pack it in a little bit, so on and so forth as you carry this pattern on further down. I think you can see in the video that the rows of thread that are going on the blank are tending to be pulled away somewhat from the previous row. And that's why you got to pack a little more often as you're pulling in that direction with your trim thread. It's not a big deal. It's just something you need to be aware of as you're working on it. If you get too far along and you go back and you see it, it might be a little late to push that gap out that you'll have between your threads. I've reached the point now where I'm ready to terminate the tiger stripe pattern. So what I'm going to do is pull the trim color away from the wrap and put a few turns on it before I trim that tag end off of the trim color there. If you've made it this far along, I got a couple of tips here right at the end for you. First off, if you're using one of these bobbin holders and you're trimming the tag end off of a trim color, it is really easy to do. I'm just going to squeeze the beads together a little bit to put a little tension on the spool. I'm going to roll the thread up onto the spool or the bobbin. I'm going to roll that thread up and get it close to the ring at the tip of the bobbin holder. I'm going to also put my finger on the bobbin itself so it can't rotate. That allows me to put tension and keep my fingers completely away from the area where I'm trying to trim that off. With the razor blade, I'm just going to set the blade down and push the bobbin holder towards the razor blade, and it'll just cut that thread real easy right there. I've got one more tip at the very end where I've got a little fuzzy I want to get rid of, but for now I'm just going to put the pull through loop in and go ahead and put several turns over that. And I like to trim mine really close with scissors, and I can get close enough and I put enough turns over it and I pull at a slight angle. I can pull my tag ends through where I don't have to cut them off after they're pulled completely through. I like doing it this way. Some people have problems with it, with wraps coming undone and stuff. There's a lot of variables on how tight you're wrapping, things like that can make a difference on that. I use quite a bit of tension from my main color. I don't have a problem doing it that way. It works for me. It might not work for somebody else, but I thought I'd just mention it. I've shown that on other videos in the past too. This last tip is if you're burning off fuzzies with a lighter, use the base of the flame. If you use the tip of the flame on the lighter, you'll get soot a lot of times on your thread that's hard or impossible to get off. I guess it has something to do with the carbon content at the tip of the flame versus at the base of the flame. Whatever it is, if you'll use the base of your flame, it will make a much cleaner flame for you to use to burn fuzzies off. I've got a couple on this one I need to get off, but I'll just show you this one that you can see real easily and just burn that off with the base of the flame. That's all I've got for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to y'all later.